You know, people. They spend their whole lives pretending the dark is something to be afraid of. They huddle under lights, build walls, tell themselves little stories about safety. But what they don't realize, is that the dark isn't the enemy. No, it's the mirror, the place where you finally see what's really inside you. The shadows don't make monsters. They just show you who's been hiding there all along. Fear is a reflection, not a force. That means fear isn't some external entity pressing down on you from the outside world. It's not a monster waiting under your bed or a shadow creeping down the hallway. It's a mirror, a psychological manifestation that reveals what you haven't yet confronted inside yourself. You see, people often think fear comes from what's out there, from chaos, from uncertainty, from the future. But it doesn't. Fear emerges when you come face to face with parts of your own potential that you've ignored, suppressed, or refused to take responsibility for. It's the emotional echo of avoidance. When you run from something long enough, your mind builds an image of it that grows larger and darker until it dominates you. But it's not the thing itself that's terrifying. It's your refusal to look at it clearly. You might notice this in the smallest of things. Maybe you avoid speaking up because you're afraid of being judged. The judgment isn't what frightens you. It's what the judgment means about who you are. It's the confrontation with your own inadequacy, your own lack of competence or courage. That's what generates the trembling. Fear reflects your distance from who you could be. The further you are from your potential, the more distorted the reflection becomes. When you approach it, when you start moving toward what you fear, the reflection becomes clearer. The monster becomes a person. The shadow becomes a teacher. So, fear operates as a diagnostic tool. It tells you precisely where you're weakest, where you haven't yet integrated your capabilities. When you feel fear, that's your psyche saying, there's something here you need to master. People often try to eliminate fear through comfort, through distraction, through denial. But the correct approach is confrontation. You don't get stronger by pretending the dragon isn't real. You get stronger by standing in front of it and realizing that part of you was always the dragon. You're not supposed to kill fear. You're supposed to understand it, to see what it's reflecting back at you. And that's why fear isn't a force. It has no independent power. It can't touch you unless you feed it belief. It only grows when you look away. Think about how children deal with the dark. When the lights go out, their imagination fills the void. Every creak, every shadow becomes a threat. But turn on the light, and it's just a chair, a coat, a harmless shape. The fear dissolves because the truth replaces it. Adults are no different, only our shadows are psychological, not physical. We fear failure, rejection, loss, responsibility. But if we could illuminate those fears with honest attention, we'd realize that most of them are merely reflections of our own limits, not external punishments waiting for us. It's also worth noticing that fear is tightly bound to meaning. The more something matters to you, the more fear it provokes. That's why indifference doesn't bring fear. Nothing's at stake. But as soon as something truly meaningful appears, an opportunity, a dream, a relationship, fear comes along for the ride. It's the cost of caring. The more meaningful your aim, the greater the shadow of fear that follows it. But again, it's not a force trying to stop you. It's a reflection of the magnitude of what you're reaching for. You can interpret fear as a signal that says, you're on the right path. Because if nothing in you trembles, maybe nothing in you is growing. You could say that fear is the proof of potential. It's the evidence that something inside you is waiting to be expanded. And if you keep turning away, if you let the reflection dictate your movement, you become smaller. You get weaker. You start to resent the world for showing you what you refuse to see. But if you face it, really face it, the reflection changes. It stops being fear and starts being recognition. You begin to see that what you thought was the enemy was actually the gateway to becoming someone capable of more than you imagined. Darkness reveals truth, not danger. That's a difficult idea to grasp, because for most of human history, darkness was the place where predators waited, where uncertainty lurked, where safety ended. Our nervous system evolved to treat the absence of light as a signal of potential threat. But psychological darkness is different. It's not the absence of sunlight, it's the absence of clarity. It's what you encounter when you step beyond what you understand, and that's where truth lies. Not in the known, not in the predictable, but in the chaos that waits beyond the edge of order. The darkness of the unknown is where your assumptions go to die, and where your genuine understanding begins to emerge. Most people avoid that darkness because it's uncomfortable. They build routines, ideologies, and narratives to shield themselves from uncertainty. But those walls don't protect you from danger. They protect you from knowledge. They keep you trapped in the illusion that you already know everything you need to know. When you stay in the light of what's familiar, you stay safe, yes, but you also stay blind. You can't grow there. The darkness, as frightening as it feels, contains the raw material of truth. It's where you find the things that have been hidden, sometimes by others, sometimes by yourself. That's why the descent into darkness has always been the central motif of every myth. You go down into the underworld not to die, but to discover what's been buried. The danger we associate with darkness often comes from within. It's the fear of what might emerge if we look too closely. People sense that if they really explore the unknown, inside or outside, they'll uncover something about themselves they might not like. Maybe it's weakness, maybe it's resentment, maybe it's potential. Because potential, paradoxically, is just as terrifying as limitation. To truly see yourself means to acknowledge what you could be, and that realization demands transformation. That's why the darkness feels so perilous. It threatens your identity, not your body. It dismantles who you think you are so that something truer can take its place. And so, darkness doesn't bring danger. It brings revelation. When the light disappears, you're forced to rely on perception instead of assumption. You start to see not with your eyes, but with your intuition, your honesty, your courage. In the light, everything looks clean and arranged. In the dark, the edges blur, and you realize how fragile your definitions were. The categories you used to make sense of the world start to dissolve, and that's disorienting, but it's also freeing. Because only when the old structures collapse can something authentic emerge. The darkness strips away illusion. It shows you what's real when everything superficial falls away. This is why many people mistake truth for danger. It feels like destruction. When you see the truth clearly, it dismantles the comfortable lies you've built your life around. It exposes you to responsibility. It forces you to act differently. And that feels threatening because it demands sacrifice. But that's not danger. It's the necessary cost of growth. Every psychological transformation begins with an encounter with the unknown, with the symbolic darkness that forces you to see yourself honestly. That's why so many spiritual and philosophical traditions emphasize stepping into the void. It's not nihilism, it's exploration. The darkness also reveals the truth about others. When times are easy, when everything's bright and predictable, people can hide behind performance. But when things fall apart, when uncertainty takes over, that's when character is exposed. You see who's loyal, who's courageous, who's honest. Adversity acts like nightfall. It makes the stars visible. The truth of people and situations emerges not when everything goes right, but when it doesn't. That's the paradox. The light hides more than it reveals, because it blinds you to what lies beneath. The dark, for all its discomfort, makes you see. So the question isn't how to stay out of the darkness, but how to enter it properly. How to walk into it without collapsing. How to look at what it reveals without turning away. That's the essence of courage, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to confront what the darkness has to show you. When you do that, you discover that what looked like danger was really truth waiting to be seen, and that the only real threat was your unwillingness to look. Monsters are born from denial. That's not just a metaphorical statement. It's a psychological fact. When people refuse to confront the darker parts of themselves, those parts don't disappear. They grow. They retreat into the unconscious, gathering energy, waiting for the moment when they can break through the thin wall of repression. Every time you look away from something you know you should face, you feed it. Every avoided responsibility, every truth you won't admit, every emotion you pretend isn't there, they all take shape in the shadows. They become the monsters that later emerge to destroy what you've built. Denial isn't safety, it's incubation. The longer you deny, the stronger the monster becomes. You can see this in individuals and in societies. When people deny their capacity for aggression, they don't become peaceful. They become passive-aggressive, resentful, and unpredictable. When a culture denies its capacity for cruelty, it doesn't eliminate cruelty. It drives it underground until it erupts as tyranny or chaos. Denial creates blindness, and blindness invites catastrophe. The monster is the part of you that could have acted with honesty and courage, but didn't. It's the potential for strength that rots into resentment, because you refuse to express it properly. And when you keep pretending it's not there, it builds pressure, like steam sealed in a pipe. Eventually, it bursts. This is why mythology and religion across time are filled with stories about confronting dragons, serpents, demons, creatures that embody chaos and destruction. They aren't just fantasies. They're representations of psychological truth. The dragon guards the treasure, meaning the thing you most need to grow as a person is hidden behind the thing you most fear to face. That's not accidental. The treasure and the monster are always found together, because you can't separate potential from danger. You can't gain wisdom without confronting ignorance, and you can't gain strength without confronting weakness. Denial tries to skip that confrontation. It tries to have the treasure without the dragon, and that's why it always fails. Denial is seductive because it offers immediate relief. You tell yourself that if you don't think about it, it isn't real. You avoid the conversation, the decision, the responsibility. You convince yourself that looking away keeps you safe. But reality doesn't vanish when you stop looking at it. It grows sharper in the corners of your mind. And eventually, what you've denied returns, not as a quiet reminder, but as chaos. That's why people say things like, "I don't know what came over me," after they've done something destructive. Something didn't come over them. It was there all along, waiting for the opportunity to express itself. That's what denial does. It gives your inner chaos control over your life by pretending it doesn't exist. When you acknowledge your capacity for darkness, something paradoxical happens. You don't become worse. You become stronger. You learn to integrate that potential consciously instead of letting it operate unconsciously. A person who recognizes their own capacity for harm is less likely to cause it. They can see it, name it, manage it. But a person who insists they're purely good, purely harmless, is dangerous. They have no understanding of what they're capable of, and therefore no control over it. Moral virtue doesn't come from weakness, it comes from strength voluntarily restrained. You can't be brave if you aren't capable of being dangerous. So monsters are not just born from denial. They are sustained by it. The moment you turn toward what you fear, the monster begins to lose form. It starts to dissolve in the light of awareness. That's why honest self-examination is so painful and so necessary. You have to see the part of you that lies, that envies, that hates, that wants to destroy. Not to indulge it, but to understand it. Because until you understand it, you'll project it onto others. You'll see the monster everywhere else but inside yourself. That's how wars start. That's how families fall apart. People see the reflection of their own denial in others and call it evil. The truth is simpler, and hard strength thrives in the unseen. The most important forms of strength aren't the ones people can point to, measure, or applaud. They develop in the quiet places, inside the mind, in solitude, in struggle, in failure, in restraint. What you see on the surface of a strong person is just the visible tip of a long process of internal confrontation. Real strength is built when no one's watching, when there's no reward, when the only thing holding you together is your decision not to fall apart. It grows in the moments when you could lie, but tell the truth, when you could give up but take another step, when you could lash out but choose discipline instead. It's not glamorous. It's not loud, but it's what determines who you become. People often confuse strength with dominance or control. They think being strong means being on top, winning, being recognized. But that's not strength. That's performance. The unseen strength is what allows a person to endure failure without breaking, to face humiliation without losing dignity, to keep their moral center when everything around them disintegrates. That kind of strength is invisible because it's internal. It's built through private sacrifices, through suffering that no one thanks you for, through countless acts of responsibility that go unnoticed. You build it when you carry what you'd rather drop, when you bear what's yours instead of blaming others. You can observe this pattern in nature. Trees that grow in calm, easy conditions develop weak roots. A sudden storm uproots them. But the trees that survive harsh winds and thin soil grow roots that anchor them deep. They're shaped by pressure, by what they endure. The same is true for people. The unseen struggles, anxiety, loss, disappointment, those are the winds that shape character. And if you respond properly, if you face those trials instead of fleeing from them, something powerful happens. You begin to develop an internal solidity that can't be faked. You start to realize that strength isn't about appearing unbreakable. It's about becoming flexible enough not to shatter. It's easy to believe that strength requires visibility because the world rewards what can be seen. We celebrate victories, not the discipline that made them possible. We admire confidence, not the doubt that was wrestled with in silence. But all visible success is the residue of invisible labor. Every musician, every athlete, every thinker who seems gifted beyond belief spent years doing unseen work, often in isolation, often doubting if it would ever matter. The world sees the result, it never witnesses the process. And that's how strength works. It thrives where recognition doesn't reach. Because if your effort depends on praise, it's not strength, it's dependency. Strength that endures has to grow in darkness, nourished by effort alone. There's also a moral dimension to unseen strength. It's the ability to act rightly when no one will know. To tell the truth when lying would be easier. To help someone when you'll get nothing in return. These acts don't make headlines, but they're what keeps civilization from collapsing. Every honest person doing what's right in obscurity contributes to the invisible foundation that supports everything else. That's the paradox of virtue. It's sustained by people no one notices. Strength that thrives in the unseen is the quiet engine of stability, both in individuals and societies. And then there's the unseen strength that comes from suffering. When life breaks you down and you keep going, when you refuse to become bitter or cruel, that's strength in its purest form. Pain is the forge of character. It strips away pretense. It reveals your limits, and if you face it properly, it forces growth. The people who've endured hardship with integrity carry a depth you can't imitate. You can see it in their eyes. They've wrestled with the darkness and come out tempered rather than destroyed. That's why their presence feels solid. They've built something invisible inside themselves, something no one can take away. So strength thrives in the unseen, because that's where truth lives. You don't become strong by performing for others. You become strong by facing what's real when you're alone. The unseen world of thought, of emotion, of discipline is where transformation happens. Everything visible is just the echo of that work. The roots grow before the branches. The inner structure forms before the outer beauty appears. And those who understand that stop chasing the illusion of strength and start building the real thing, quietly, patiently, where no one is looking. Evil begins when good people refuse to look at themselves. Control begins where fear ends. Fear is the great disorganizer. It scatters your thoughts, fragments your focus, and turns every possibility into a threat. When you act from fear, you're not acting from clarity. You're reacting from chaos. You can't steer your life while flinching at every shadow. Control, in the deepest sense, doesn't mean dominance over the world. It means mastery over yourself. It means your emotions, your impulses, your anxiety, your anger. They serve you, not the other way around. And that mastery begins the moment fear stops dictating your actions. As long as fear rules your behavior, you're a puppet pulled by invisible strings. Most people misunderstand control. They think it's about having power over external conditions, money, reputation, outcomes, other people. But those are illusions of control. The real territory you can govern is internal. The only kingdom you can truly rule is the one inside your own mind. That's why fear is such a powerful enemy. It's the mechanism that seizes that kingdom from within. When you're afraid, your vision narrows. You stop thinking long-term. You lose perspective. You hand over your decision, making to the part of yourself that only cares about immediate survival. It's useful when a tiger's chasing you. It's disastrous when you're trying to build a meaningful life. Fear makes you a short-term creature in a long-term world. The opposite of fear isn't recklessness. It's composure. Composure comes from truth. When you confront what you're afraid of, you strip away its false size. Fear magnifies things, distorts them. It makes obstacles appear larger than they are, and your abilities smaller than they truly are. But when you face what you fear, even in small doses, something happens to your nervous system. It recalibrates. You realize you can handle more than you thought. That realization is the seed of control. Every act of courage, no matter how small, is a negotiation with fear. You're teaching your brain that you don't need to be ruled by panic to survive. And that's how control grows. Through exposure, through voluntary confrontation with what frightens you. The person who never faces fear never learns to manage it, and therefore never becomes free. It's why the avoidance of fear always leads to weakness. When you avoid what you fear, you build a life organized around escape. When you confront it, you build a life organized around strength. You stop running and start steering. That's when you begin to sense control not as tightness or rigidity, but as calm authority. You stop trying to control everything outside you and start governing your inner reactions. It's also worth noting that fear often hides behind ambition, anger, or cynicism. People think they're striving for success, but deep down they're just afraid of failure. They think they're being assertive, but they're terrified of being ignored. They claim they don't care, but they're afraid to be hurt. Fear wears disguises because it knows you wouldn't tolerate it if you saw it clearly. The first step toward control is naming the fear underneath the mask. Once you name it, it loses some of its power. It stops whispering from the shadows and starts standing in the light, where you can deal with it rationally. Control doesn't mean the absence of fear. It means fear no longer decides for you. You can feel it, acknowledge it, even listen to what it's trying to warn you about, but you remain the one who chooses what to do next. That's psychological sovereignty. The great paradox is that you only gain control by surrendering the illusion of total control. You accept uncertainty, you accept risk, you accept that life is unpredictable, and that acceptance removes the leverage fear has over you. The more you try to eliminate all uncertainty, the more fear dominates you. But when you face uncertainty voluntarily, it becomes manageable. That's why courage isn't the absence of fear. It's fear integrated, understood, and transcended. So when fear ends, control begins, not because the world changes, but because your perception does. You start to act from strength instead of reaction. You start to decide instead of defend. You move from chaos to order, not by bending the world to your will, but by bringing your will into alignment with truth. And that's what real control is: the ability to stay composed in the presence of uncertainty, to act with purpose in the face of fear, and to build stability from within instead of begging for it from outside. The dark is only powerful to those who hide from it. The darkness itself has no inherent strength. It doesn't move, it doesn't act. It simply exists as a space where things are unknown. The power it seems to hold comes from avoidance, from our refusal to confront what it contains. When you hide from the dark, it grows larger in your imagination. You fill it with every unexamined fear, every suppressed emotion, every avoided truth. The darkness becomes a canvas for everything unresolved within you. And the longer you refuse to face it, the more distorted that image becomes, until the darkness no longer represents mystery, but terror. Yet the terror is of your own creation. The dark borrows its power from your denial. This dynamic is ancient and psychological. Human beings have always feared what they cannot see, both literally and metaphorically. We're wired to prefer clarity, predictability, light, but the world and the human psyche doesn't operate only in the light. The dark is part of reality. It contains the unknown, the chaotic, the potential. If you avoid it, you cut yourself off from half of existence. You stay confined to the small, familiar space you can control, and everything beyond that border becomes an enemy. But when you turn toward the darkness, when you look into it willingly, something shifts. You begin to see patterns instead of threats, possibilities instead of dangers. You reclaim the energy you've been using to avoid it. The people who seem most haunted by life's darkness are often those who've spent years trying not to see it. They build lives out of distraction, comfort, or ideology, all in the hope that the darkness will stay outside the walls. But it never does. It seeps in through cracks, through failures, through the quiet moments when distraction fades. The truth is, you can't escape the dark because it's not separate from you. It's the unknown parts of your own nature. It's the side of yourself you've refused to understand, the impulses, desires, and doubts that don't fit your self-image. And when you hide from them, they don't go away. They grow stronger precisely because they're unseen. They start influencing your behavior indirectly, shaping your choices, distorting your perceptions. This is why so much of psychological development involves confronting the shadow. You have to integrate the parts of yourself that you'd rather ignore. The resentment, the envy, the cowardice, the ambition, all of it. Not to act them out, but to acknowledge that they exist within you. Because if you don't, they'll act themselves out without your permission. The dark inside you becomes powerful when you pretend it's not there. It begins to rule from the unconscious. But once you bring it into awareness, it loses its tyranny. You stop being manipulated by impulses you don't understand. You start to act with intention instead of reaction. The same principle applies beyond the individual. Societies that refuse to acknowledge their capacity for evil end up manifesting it. Cultures that deny their flaws become hypocritical, cruel, and self-destructive. The collective dark grows powerful when it's repressed. The only antidote is truth, honest confrontation with what's unpleasant. Light doesn't conquer darkness by force. It transforms it by understanding. When you look at what you fear and learn from it, the fear dissolves. The dark becomes informative rather than threatening. It becomes a space of potential, of new knowledge, of growth, of creation. But that transformation only happens when you stop hiding. Hiding gives the dark its teeth. When you refuse to face a difficult truth, it starts to chase you. When you avoid a painful conversation, it festers. When you bury guilt or grief, it twists itself into bitterness. Avoidance creates monsters out of what were once manageable realities. Facing them doesn't erase the pain, but it places it in context. It brings proportion. You realize that the dark was never infinite. It was simply unexplored. And every time you face a piece of it, it gets smaller. The act of looking, of naming, of understanding, those are the lights you carry into the unknown. That's what makes the dark lose its power. The people who seem calm in the face of darkness aren't immune to fear. They've learned that the only way to reduce fear is to confront it. They've walked through their own uncertainty and found clarity on the other side. The dark still exists, but it no longer dominates them. Because once you stop hiding, the dark becomes what it always was, not an enemy, but a realm of truth waiting to be seen.